What does your crazy neighbor do to be labeled the crazy neighbor? Story 1. Had severe anger issues and yelled at anything or anyone he didn't like on the street. A few years ago he had a road rage incident, and when he started banging on the other car's windows, the occupants got out and beat him badly. During this he had a heart attack, and now barely has enough mobility to walk to the mailbox and back. Also, he doesn't yell anymore. Story 2. My sister's neighbor reported my sister to the police because her kids were playing in my sister's garden, not for the usual reasons. Too much noise, etc. Nope, because a volcano in Italy had erupted and the radiation would hurt them. My sister lives in the UK. Story 3. She has a penchant for going around sticking nails in people's tires at night. This has happened dozens of times to nearly everyone on the street, though she's slowed down since more people started installing video cams and motion sensor lights in their driveways. Story 4. Pulled us over pretending to be a police officer, saying that we had somehow broken the law whilst pulling out of our driveway, and that she was going to call it in. She isn't a cop, lol. I considered using my dash cam video to actually call it in, but we had just moved in and I wasn't sure if she was the type of crazy to burn the house down or poison my dog. After chatting with the other neighbors, it turns out she's just the wannabe HOA president in a neighborhood with no HOA. So, mostly harmless. Just very annoying. Story 5. My neighbor sits in his yard, hides behind his plants and meows at people who pass by. He is not dangerous at all, but he is not right in the head either. His caretakers are his parents, and they seem to be very nice people. His dad once told me he just likes to be a cat, and left it at that. I didn't ask any more questions. Story 6. I'm the HOA president. I get elected over and over again because I just focus on things like making sure the buildings are safe and maintained, and that the grounds are reasonably cared for, or the pool is working. I had some guy come in and was all gung-ho about fixing all the things that were wrong. So I said, here, take the job. I don't have a lot of free time anyway. So he takes his year term and basically runs it like the stereotype. Everyone is annoying. I'm still on the board, so I stop the things I can. But we have a couple other obnoxious busybodies on the board, so I orchestrate a coup. I basically make sure the busybody is on his side, don't get re-elected to the board, and then get myself voted back, and he sued me. I think his attorney thought I would just back down. I keep an attorney on retainer because of various reasons. My attorney got the whole thing thrown out in such a way I could sue to costs, so I did. I then went back to running things the way I always did, except I fined him for every little thing I could for like a year. That was super petty, but he sued me. Story 7. He eats my flowers. In his defense, he told us that he has been doing it for years when he introduced himself after we bought the house. He also brought over frozen cookies in a plastic bag as a housewarming gift, but wasn't sure what was in them. We share a side yard and he is a really great neighbor. Just an older, quiet guy who keeps to himself and eats my flowers. Comes over to my yard and eats the lilies raw, or brings scissors and clips the heads to boil and make jam. I thought that his particular foraging was interesting and quirky, so I planted a couple raspberry, blackberry, and blueberry bushes 3 years ago, when we first moved in on the side yard we share. I told him to help himself to berries anytime, especially before the birds do. The bushes have all gone insane, and the entire side of my house is now summer berry haven for us to share. Having a decent relationship with the guy I share a property line with is worth some dead-headed flowers. Story 8. This older lady lives across the street from me, and she is obsessed with leaves falling on her lawn, to the point that she will come out of her house and pick up one individual leaf off the grass in the fall or any other time. She spends hours a day outside with the leaf blower in fall. She will go and knock on other neighbors' doors if she thinks you have too many leaves on your grass. She'll come over into your yard and do it yourself herself. If you're not home, what I think is weird is that she's in her 70s. No kids or grandkids living with her, and lives alone in a pretty large 4-bedroom house with an amazing in-ground pool in the backyard, with a slide and diving board and everything. Nobody has used that pool in at least 5 years. Yet she opens it up every summer. Somehow she likes my family and has never once yelled at us about our leaves, and randomly brings things over like half-eaten gallons of ice cream and asks if we want it. Because she's not using it. Story 9. Used to live in a little town of 300 people, where we had an elderly neighbor named Gladys. She would routinely look near our garbage can outside and take the recyclable bottles and cans we would leave for her after we cleaned out a fish tank. We put the gravel and fake plants in a bag and left it on top of the garbage can. Because it was already full. About a week later, Gladys hollered at me while I was outside to come over as she wanted to show me something. She had taken that bag we had left and planted the fake plants along the side of her house. She said she wasn't real confident that they would make it, but so far they seemed to be thriving. I could only nod and compliment her on her green thumb. Story 10. I used to live in Ahoa. One of the members on the board lived across the street from my neighbor and I. He sent a letter to us, saying that we all have to mow the lawn on the same day at the same cut height, and in the same pattern to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally cut on different days, and in opposite patterns just to annoy the guy. Story 11. Had a neighbor who wouldn't let anyone use his driveway because he didn't want it to get dirty. Anyone, including himself. He parked on the street outside. If he thought you were having a party, he would drag a bunch of plastic bags full of God knows what to the end of his driveway, so no one could turn around it. One time I came home, and he was outside hosing it down in the rain. To his credit, I've never seen a cleaner driveway. Story 12. I used to have a neighbor who was legitimately mentally ill, although I don't know his actual diagnosis. His truck wouldn't start one day, dead battery, and he told everyone on the street that another neighbor was stealing the electricity. He knew this because of the way this guy parked his vehicle. Obviously, it was sucking electricity from the ground for his battery, which drained the car batteries near him. Many times he would run down the street and warn everyone to hide their valuables because Japan was invading the country. He wasn't on drugs, but he did take medication for his mental illness, and everyone on our street could tell when he stopped taking it. Whenever he would start saying completely irrational things, we would remind him to take his medication, and he would thank us and go home, presumably to take it. He lived alone and he was getting older, so I think he had a hard time remembering to take it. There were many, many more incidents. Story 13. When I first moved in, my neighbor walked into the house unannounced. When my wife gets home, sometimes she wants to stay in her car having a phone conversation. He will come out and walk down the side of his house, checking his sprinkler controls, and looks at my wife. He has it to huge bushes he refuses to cut. It blocks our view of backing out of our driveway. The fire department came by to clear trees and bushes around the fire hydrants. The neighbor came out and yelled at the fireman, "This bush is older than you." Needless to say, I hope there are no house fires. Story 14. We used to live next to a woman that would have a disco party for her cats in her backyard at 10 a.m. every few days. She would put up a disco ball and party lights with music playing. It was a little bit odd, but what made it crazy was her dancing like a Native American performing a ritual around the disco ball. It's honestly one of the strangest things I've ever witnessed. Story 15. She stalks us. Like every time I get home, she'll walk outside and tell me I was either 3 minutes later getting home this time or that I'm home 2 minutes earlier, and then ask me why. One time my friend and her sister came to pick me up. The neighbor was against her window with her hands and face pressed up on the glass trying to look at who was coming to pick me up. My friend and her sister were so terrified they called me telling me to hurry up because a crazy lady was staring at them through a window. I replied, "Oh, it's just the stalker neighbor." Yeah, that was a funny day. Story 17. I cared for an elderly woman for many years. She lived to the age of 93 in a crime-ridden inner-city neighborhood by being as tough and nasty as any criminal living nearby. Her oddest actions involved her incorrect belief that she owned the road in front of her house. She didn't even own a car, but she insisted that nobody park there. She would confront them if they parked in front of her house. If they did it again, she slashed their tires in the middle of the night over and over for years. She was never caught, but everybody knew it was her. She only stopped when she lost the physical strength to slash a tire in her mid-80s. Then she started using spray paint on the cars. "He don't park in front of my house no more," was all the justification she needed to damage her neighbors' cars. Story 18. I've heard way more than I need to about their health ailments and bowel movements. One night I'm in the backyard sitting in lawn chairs, watching the stars with the wife when she pops out with a flashlight in our faces. I went off, "What the hell are you doing?" She apologized and left with no explanation. I could go on, but then I may start thinking about moving again. Story 19. Years ago in rural Arizona we shared a pond with a crazy neighbor, more sad than anything. He was in his 40s and lived with his mother around 1988. A Vietnam veteran, he would walk out to our shared pond with a .45 and a box of 50 rounds. He would then absolutely unload on the pond while yelling, "Police his brass," and walk quietly home. This happened every 90 days for about 3 years. Story 20. My neighbor in the flat upstairs likes to stand outside my open ground floor window at 6 a.m. and argue with her dog. Like, I know you don't want to go home yet, but if you don't stop being a jerk you're not getting your sausage roll. Or I'm not the one who wanted to go out, so what's your problem? Happens at least twice a week. Story 21. She calls the city on everything. Ever walk out, look at your yard and think, yep, I need to mow this weekend? That is the point where my neighbor will call the city and complain that my lawn is too long. If I park on the street she will call the cops and complain that my car is an abandoned vehicle even though it has current tags and is parked in front of the house it's registered to. The cops got tired of dealing with her and told me I need to park in my driveway and that I cannot park in the street, or they'll tow my vehicle. If she sees my dogs outside, she calls animal control and claims they're being neglected and abused. She is currently going around the neighborhood telling people that I am poisoning her cats, which I'm apparently doing a horrible job of, since the cats are healthy and very much still around. She is a truly awful person who is very much mentally unstable. She doesn't just do this to me though. Other neighbors on the block complain about the exact same thing. Story 22. The neighbor behind us had a leak in his water pipe and, rather than fix it, he just had the sump pump drain it out into the backyard. This meant that all year round the back of our yard was a little bit damp. Eventually, the leaky pipe burst and filled the house with 5 feet of water. His solution to this was just to keep the pump running and flood the entire neighborhood. After about an hour, a posse of all the neighbors whose yards were being flooded confronted him and called the city to shut off the water. The city fixed the water pipe and the neighbor ended up with a large fine. At least my yard stays basically dry now. I should also mention that this neighbor once rented the house out to a bunch of crackheads, and it nearly burned down because the ex-girlfriend of one of these morons snuck in and set the house on fire.